Right off the bat, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what is the Authority? Great question. The Authority was one of the premier super teams from a comic universe known as the Wildstorm universe. But you may be asking, what is the Wildstorm universe? Another excellent question. Answering it will depend on whether or not you remember the 1990s, because if you do, Wildstorm was 90s incarnate. It was created by a bunch of comic pros, most notably Jim Lee, who was designing some of the most iconic looks in Marvel history. Yes, Scott, I do prefer yellow spandex, and you should too. If you don't remember the 90s, this was the big guns and bandoliers and pouches generation of comics. Everything was radical. Some popular non-Authority Wildstorm characters have names like Spartan, and Warblade, and Zealot, and apparently Ladytron. Not sure what the deal was with them. I'm going to assume they were mostly a mix of aliens and cyborgs, but that was the style. Wildstorm was its own imprint that was eventually bought by DC and very recently folded into the mainline DC universe. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about Wildstorm since it was a lot of comics that I did not really pay attention to. Like, I recognize this guy, Grifter. But if you told me he was actually an Amalgam Comics version of Red Hood and Bucky put together, I'd buy it. Honestly, when I heard this universe had their own Batman called Midnighter and the pitch was what if Batman did murders and was gay with Superman, I had a feeling this wasn't for me. Now, like all things, the Wildstorm universe is complicated. Even that Midnighter thing sounds like something a 12-year-old would pitch, and it certainly is, but also sometimes Midnighter is a fascinating character, and the Midnighter-Apollo relationship is decent representation. And also sometimes it's an excuse for the comic to do edgy slurs. It's a mixed bag. Now, in the last few months, I have focused specifically on the Authority, so let's talk about them. The story of the Authority begins with a team called Stormwatch. They were sort of Wildstorm's Avengers, a UN-sanctioned super team responsible for dealing with all kinds of super disasters. This team was fine, and the series was moderately successful, but it was not until Warren Ellis took over the series that things got interesting. Ellis introduced a couple of new members of Stormwatch, and then nearly the entire team was killed by xenomorphs. That's right, like from aliens. The surviving members, led by Jenny Sparks, formed their own supergroup called the Authority. The Authority, unlike Stormwatch, was not sanctioned by the UN, although they did work with some members of the UN from time to time, but they did their own thing. They operated out of a humongous ship located in another universe called the Bleed and were able to teleport anywhere on Earth simply by yelling, "Door." The Authority was adult. These guys swore, they smoked, they had sex. Some of the stories dealt with issues I'm not even going to talk about because I don't want to get this video demonetized. And the characters and settings were more sci-fi than usual. Ellis was always great at playing with big weird concepts, and every arc in the Authority introduced a new bizarre villain or species or world. The Authority killed whoever they wanted, they went wherever they wanted, and since they were usually doing the right thing, it was not an issue. However, they did eventually find themselves on the wrong side of the law and did a coup and took over the government. This is one of those teams, although it took a surprising amount of time to get there. There are 7 core members of the Authority, as that is the magic number for superhero teams, so I'm going to split the Authority into 2 videos. I'm also going to talk about the character who I believe they will add to the Authority for their Authority movie. Speaking of that, we do not know all that much about Superman Legacy or the Authority, but it certainly seems like, based on rumors, that Superman is going to find himself at odds with some version of the Authority, perhaps named Stormwatch or something else, in his first movie, Superman Legacy. I do not know if that's true, but it does gel with the movie's mission statement of testing Clark's values against a new kind of justice. This would also explain why the Authority is the second DC movie after Superman Legacy. I can see a version of this movie where the Authority are the Superman Legacy bad guys, but some reform and restart the team in the Authority movie. It also doesn't hurt that the new Grant Morrison Superman in the Authority comic was essentially about that. Superman needed a team that could take his place, so he brought some original Authority members together with new and old DC faces to form a new Authority, and we know James Gunn loves Morrison comics. So with all that out of the way, in this video, we are going to fancast 4 members of the Authority, starting with the team's leader. So without any further ado, let's go to the new Aculo Zone. Jenny Sparks is the spirit of the 20th century, so probably not going to see too much of her in the 21st century. So one of these 3 things is probably going to happen. Either Jenny Sparks is going to change into just the spirit of electricity, or Jenny Sparks is going to become the spirit of the 21st century, or she's going to become Jenny Quantum, the spirit of the 21st century from the comics. All of these come with issues. Spirit of Electricity is cleaner, since Jenny won't be tied to a time period, but will still be able to operate in the same time period. The light bulb was invented in the late 19th century, and it wasn't until the early 20th that most homes in the US had electrical power. So say Jenny came into being in the early 20th century, along with the rise of widespread commercial electricity. Downside is you lose the century label, which I do quite like. Also in the comics, Jenny dies when the 20th century ends and is replaced by a similar century spirit, so you don't get that endpoint now. This was a product of the fact that these comics ran through the new millennium in real time. These movies could take place in the past, but I think they'll also want to exist in sync with the real world. Jenny could also be called the spirit of the 21st century, however, that also comes with issues. Her powers of electricity are very clearly tied to the rise of electricity as a power source around the world, so changing the century would lose that connection. Also in the comics, there already is a spirit of the 21st century, Jenny Quantum, and her powers are different, tied closer to the 21st century, so it makes more sense to just make Jenny Sparks Jenny Quantum. However, that name also does not quite work. For one thing, part of the appeal of Sparks is her simple electricity powers. Quantum powers are much less clear and would probably manifest in purple nonsense. Also, Marvel sort of owns the word quantum. They even had a quantum movie set in the quantum realm. As much as I'm sure they'd like people to forget that exists, it would be kind of difficult for DC to fully realize the idea of Jenny Quantum without it sounding like something they copied from Quantumania. Also, Jenny Sparks is just a super slick name. 3 syllables is the perfect superhero name length. Superman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Green Lantern, Aquaman, Catwoman, Human Torch, War Machine, Black Widow, Doctor Strange, Wolverine, Magneto, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Jubilee, Shadowcat, Domino, Gamora, Nebula, Daredevil, Punisher, Black Panther, Ghost Rider, Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider, Spider-Ham, Spider-Punk, Blue Beetle, Booster Gold, Green Arrow, Harley Quinn, Constantine, Etrigan, Zatanna, Supergirl, Power Girl, Midnighter, Apollo. Here, let's take a fun detour into the phonetics of superhero names. Short names tend to denote power. Hulk, Thor, Death, Null, Storm, Beast, Rogue, Thing, Groot, Drax, Flash, Raven. Short and sweet. Name does not have much to say. 2 syllables are for heroes who are human in comparison to others. Batman, Robin, Nightwing, Red Hood, Spoiler, Black Bat, Batgirl, Shang-Chi, Luke Cage, She-Hulk, Namor, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Angel, Psylocke, Hawkeye, Star-Lord, Deadpool, Cable, Cyborg, Starfire, Beast Boy, Atom, Shazam. 4 and up is formality. Captain America, Captain Britain, Wonder Woman, Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman, Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Man 2099, Silver Surfer, Rocket Raccoon, Hyperion, Adam Warlock, Martian Manhunter, Mr. Miracle. Usually features a title. Where's I going with this? Oh yeah, Jenny Sparks feels way more free, devil may care attitude. Jenny Quantum feels sciencey and serious. And I think as far as what Jenny is trying to project, Devil May Care is much truer to the character. Jenny sells herself as a rogue who does what she wants and doesn't care what other people think. That could partially come from the fact that when we meet Jenny, she's pushing 100, and the older you are, the less you tend to care about what other people think. But also, Jenny knows that this kind of attitude is what her team expects from her and respects. To some extent, Jenny is putting on a face. She cares more than she lets on, but to feel like the kind of leader that can save the world, she needs to seem like an all-business moves maker. So I like that the name Jenny Sparks sets up Jenny as a loose cannon. Best compromise, Jenny Sparks is an electric-powered person who is the spirit of the 20th century who continues to live past it. After all, it isn't like we've given up on electricity. Jenny Quantum can come along later, but Jenny Sparks should still be around. The history of Jenny, like most of the Authority, is a blur, although thanks to a 5-issue Authority origin series told from Jenny's point of view, we know more about Jenny than any of the other members. Jenny was born in 1900 and grew up in Europe. She went to school, became a captain in the army, got married very briefly, and served the world a bunch. And over her century-long life, she did a Forrest Gump. Bumped into historical figures, shaped world events. Most notably, Jenny suggested a struggling painter by the name of Adolf get into politics. She admits that was a mistake. Jenny looks like your typical British young adult. When her powers manifested, Jenny stopped aging, so she's around 19 for the last 80 years. Jenny has blonde hair that's usually tied back into a ponytail. She wears a leather jacket over a shirt sporting the Union Jack and smokes constantly. Jenny Sparks is trying to look cool. And while Jenny is sort of a rebel, she's also the leader of the Authority. Jenny created the team after her previous super team, Stormwatch, got massacred by xenomorphs and there was no one left to defend the Earth from all manner of existential threats. The Authority exists in the same gray area as the movie Avengers. The governments of the world know they exist and are not always comfortable with the team, but the UN also understands that the Authority is mostly good, especially in the beginning, and without them, Earth would have been taken over by superpowered warlords or interdimensional Italians. So they let the Authority do their thing. And since Jenny has spent her life working with various military organizations, her name carries some weight. So while Jenny works outside the law and considers herself an anarchist, she shares more with Captain America or Superman than she'd probably like to admit. And Jenny is strong. She can wield electricity as a weapon, and throughout her career she's used it to kill a bunch of guys. She even murdered a god. And not like a Thor god, like a god. Essential characteristics. Jenny Sparks needs to feel young. She's got energy, an electric personality. And it's why I don't want to cast anyone over, say, 30, 35 for this one. I think she's drawn closer to someone in their late 20s, but canonically she is supposed to look 19. Jenny is also a badass, and I mean that in the most 90s way possible. She smokes. She swears, she has lots of sex, she wears leather jacket, she has a ponytail, she has paint on her overalls. Jenny Sparks does not play by anybody's rules but her own. Our Jenny cannot feel like a straight edge. Jenny is also a leader. She commands the respect of some of the weirdest and most powerful superheroes in the Wildstorm universe. Many of them work alone unless Jenny Sparks calls, and they're probably going to be much older than Jenny seems, so she's going to need to bring a convincing bit of confidence. And she's good at the hero job. Jenny shouts orders to the team, and they listen because she knows what she's doing. And most importantly, Jenny is very likable. Sure, she can come off as a jerk, but every Authority member gets along pretty well with Jenny. Maybe originally they don't trust her, but Jenny earns their respect, and by the end, everyone has warmed up to Jenny Sparks. The runners-up. I don't know a ton about Emma Mackey, but she's been popping up in all kinds of these conversations recently, be it in response to her role in Barbie or her appearance on one of the lowest shortlists. However, she seems like she could fit this role too. I've heard very good things about sex education. She seems plausible. The only non-Brit on this list I'm willing to entertain is Elle Fanning, only because she pulls off a pretty passable British accent in The Great, and I think she's great on that show. Also, she's young, like currently 25. That could really work with the youthful spirit of Jenny Sparks. I really enjoyed Daisy Edgar Jones in Fresh. Seems like she can do spunky, kind of has the look down. Speaking of daisies, we have not quite figured out what to do with Daisy Ridley post-Star Wars yet, so maybe it's this. Now, if you really want a comic-accurate Jenny, Coda's Emilia Jones is currently 21, the youngest actor on this list. She's solid in Coda. I didn't finish Lock and Key, but listen, I have two really good ones, so let's just get to them. The winners. I know she comes up in all this stuff, but Jodie Comer would be an absolutely terrific Jenny Sparks. First of all, she looks just like her, like spitting image. Like, this picture could very well be the cover of a comic with Jenny Sparks on it. Also, in shows like Killing Eve and movies like Free Guy, Jodie plays a professional. She is serious, able to have fun, but someone who seems endlessly competent. And she's funny. Jenny needs to have a sense of humor, a dry, sarcastic wit. The other name that comes up more than a few times whenever I talk about Jenny Sparks is Vanessa Kirby, who I love for a lot of superhero roles. And Hobbs and Shaw proved that Kirby can handle a big action role. So looking at all of that, for me, the best Jenny Sparks is Jodie Comer. Midnighter is extreme. We don't know Midnighter's real name. He was presumably a real guy before he became Midnighter, but the mad scientist / sort of Wildstorm Dr. Cornelius Harry Bendix messed with the man who would be Midnighter's mind, so when he put on the costume and spoke his new codename, Midnighter's old life was gone. I think that's part of the charm of Midnighter. He is a clear pastiche of Batman, but different in a bunch of specific ways, and one is, he does not really have a secret identity. None of this, do I wear the mask or is Bruce Wayne the real mask? Midnighter is Midnighter, full-time, end of story. That's not to say he does not have hobbies or a social life, but those elements of his life are never really at conflict with the superhero stuff. That's not what a Midnighter story is usually about. Like, and let's get this one out of the way right up top, Midnighter is gay and usually in a relationship with the Wildstorm Superman who is known as Apollo. We'll get to him. But this is not a Batman Catwoman thing. Apollo and Midnighter are both together, they fight crime together on the same side of the law, It works. So how does Midnighter fight crime, you ask? Well, he's a super soldier type. Enhanced strength, reflexes, speed, stamina, etc. He has a wicked healing factor that puts him right up there with guys like Wolverine, and he's an expert with all kinds of weapons. But also, almost every Midnighter comic appearance happens about the same way. Everyone's out fighting their guys, Jenny's electrocuting dudes, Apollo's throwing him into orbit, and then Midnighter walks into the room with one or two goons and says some version of, "I have a fight computer in my brain that lets me predict every outcome of any fight. I have thought thousands of simulations. You may think you're making it out alive, but I won this fight before I walked in the room." Seriously, it's in every comic. Like Ben Reilly describing the walls. Who is this for, Midnighter? You're going to kill him. You have work to do. We all know what's going on. We're not jumping into Authority issue 10 blind. But yeah, like Midnighter says, he has a fight computer that allows him to analyze any interaction millions of times and guide Midnighter to an outcome where he comes out on top. Think Strange in Infinity War. Midnighter could beat pretty much any superhero, although he's weak against strong psychics and unpredictable opponents. Midnighter and Apollo were originally members of Stormwatch, but left to do their own thing. They were then recruited by Jenny Sparks to join the Authority and stayed around for the run of the team. They even joined Superman's version of the Authority when that started in DC Comics. I would also say Midnighter and Apollo are the two highest profile Wildstorm characters, save for maybe Grifter, but this is partially because the pitch is so simple. Gay, psychotic Batman who is in a relationship with Superman. And partially because Midnighter is just a lot of fun. He's all over the place. Honestly, he reads like Moon Knight from memes who wants to beat up Dracula. He is an unhinged lunatic with a sense of humor. As a result of his popularity, Midnighter, along with Apollo and Grifter, survived the migration over to DC. Midnighter even got his own solo series by Steve Orlando, which ended with a Midnighter and Apollo series. He regularly interacts with characters like Dick Grayson and certain DC villains, who I will not spoil because I really like that book, but Midnighter fits into the DC universe pretty nicely. And that is my Nando comic recommendation of the video, Midnighter by Steve Orlando. And even though, yes, he's a self-proclaimed psychopath, Midnighter tends to be one of the more reliable members of the Authority. He gets in, gets the job done, and gets out. Usually he has a little fun and sometimes he does something unexpected, but Midnighter is not a loose cannon like a Moon Knight. He's surprisingly grounded, and Midnighter loves a good fight. Even though he's seen it a million different ways, he revels in the brutality. Usually because the villains he runs up against are extra bad dudes. So that's where the Punisher stuff comes out. Midnighter is not doing this begrudging. You get the sense that if Midnighter were never recruited into the Authority, he'd still tag along from time to time when there are extra fun people to kill. And yes, Midnighter is one of those Batmans who kills. But that's not to say Midnighter is bloodthirsty. Perfect example is Tankman. In the second Authority run, the team comes into conflict with an evil Jack Kirby-looking superhero creator who commands a humongous army of heroes who are similar to but legally distinct from the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Inhumans, and so on and so on. Midnighter found himself matched up against Tankman, the team's Iron Man equivalent. And even though Midnighter could definitely defeat Tankman the old-fashioned way, Midnighter just talks him down, convinces Tankman to quit, start a life, gives him a hug, and the issue ends with Midnighter reading a letter from Tankman thanking Midnighter for setting him free. Midnighter is full of surprises. His one weakness is that he is not the best partner. Midnighter and Apollo have gone through some rough patches, and Midnighter has taken that badly, let his guard down, and that led to a pretty big loss, but he always manages to patch things up with Apollo. Defining characteristics. Midnighter kills with a smile on his face. This actor is going to need to be able to get really into it, like sell the unhinged aspects of the character. He's chaotic, making jokes, having fun. Midnighter needs to be scary. If you get in a room alone with Midnighter, a chill travels down your spine. I think getting someone with villain experience could help here. But Midnighter is also a lover. He's got what's probably one of the longest same-sex relationships in all of comics. He's romantic, he's passionate. It would be great if he had chemistry with our Apollo. But he's not all business. Midnighter can still have fun. And he's a dad. Midnighter and Apollo raised Jenny's successor, Jenny Quantum, and by all accounts, they do a good job. Teach her right from wrong, keep her safe, it all seems good. So we need an actor who can be kind of nurturing. But it's worth asking, does Midnighter need to be played by a gay actor? Need? Maybe not. But that would certainly narrow it down, so I'm going to stick to LGBTQ+ actors. I guess not L, you get the idea. Most importantly, we need an actor here who could also play Batman. The look, the vibe, the physicality. This guy is Batman, but also be gay and do crimes. The runners-up. I've got a few here. Some I like more than others, and some I am more familiar with than others. Let's start with Wentworth Miller. I think he's okay for this role. Not my favorite, but definitely could do it. Obviously, I've seen him as Captain Cold, and I sort of remember Prison Break, but I just don't know if he has the exact energy I'm looking for. Another actor who came up in my search is Cheyenne Jackson. You may remember him as Danny, the new cast member on 30 Rock, or as Devin in Werewolves Within. I think Cheyenne has more range than people probably expect, and he could shine in a manic role like this. If you want to go a little younger, you've got Brandon Flynn from 13 Reasons Why. My only problem here is he feels a little too young. Maybe this is just me, but Midnighter and Apollo feel like they should be older than Superman. I can't quite place why. Maybe it's because they're expected to have had a full life before they joined Stormwatch and the Authority. So like they presumably started being Midnighter and Apollo at the same age Superman is now, and they've been doing it for a little while longer. I guess I'd like them to be older so that Superman is going to tell them to stop killing. I want them to seem like old guys going like, oh, this kid, he just doesn't know what he's talking about. So for that reason, Brandon Flynn might be too young. Teen Wolf and Ratchet's Charlie Carver is definitely closer to the age I want, but he would probably end up being the same age as Superman, so I don't love it. Luke McFarlane is now a little closer to what I expect age-wise, and he's got a lot of experience. He just headlined Bros alongside Billy Eichner, and apparently this guy is in like every Hallmark Christmas movie. Like he does so many, it is eye-opening. Like you ever find out about a subculture that you know nothing about and you get into it and it is way bigger than you expect? This is that for me. There are so many movies where a woman needs to find love before Christmas, and Luke McFarlane is in a lot of them. Knock at the Cabin's Ben Aldridge. Seems like he'd also be a pretty good pick. He even played Thomas Wayne in Pennyworth, The Origin of Batman's Butler. But there really is only one actor who I love for Midnighter. He's played psychotic villains. He's played goofball villains. He's even the only watchable part of that goddamn Pinocchio movie. I'm talking about Fast Six's Luke Evans. He's got the perfect balance of genuine menace and cheese to nail Midnighter's energy. And his characters are always just endlessly confident. He knows he can beat you. Whether he's right or wrong depends on the movie, but like Midnighter, he is positive he's going to win whatever fight he's in. So Luke Evans is my Midnighter. Now, on to the other half of Wildstorm's dynamic duo. So we're at Apollo. Let's see if we can do this in a minute. Apollo is Superman. He's another Superman guy. We have covered so many of them on the channel, from Gladiator to Hyperion to Sentry. Apollo is another one who certainly does exist. Like Midnighter, Apollo was an experiment. We do not know his real name or anything about his background before he became Apollo. He has solar powers, he's very strong. Superman. There just really is not much to Apollo. He's almost exclusively in books with Midnighter doing the same thing as Midnighter. He doesn't really disagree very much. This isn't like if Batman and Superman actually dated, because those two would argue all the time. Apollo and Midnighter are more or less in sync. Apollo will also do a big murder or kill a dictator or whatever Midnighter is doing. Honestly, Apollo on his own is sort of shallow. I'd say he's the second most underwritten member of the original Authority. You know, and it's fine. A lot of the other personalities are more dynamic. Apollo is steady. He shows up, shoots lasers, kisses Midnighter, goes home. I will say one interesting thing about Apollo is that he is not the leader of the Authority. Even when Jenny Sparks dies, Apollo does not take over. He doesn't seem to want to. And he's the only Superman pastiche I can think of that does that. Just takes a back seat. Hyperion leads the Squadron Supreme, Homelander leads the Seven, Gladiator leads the Imperial Guard, but Apollo is like fifth in charge. And the relationship with Midnighter is interesting. This was the late 90s, early 2000s, and we had a gay Superman-Batman relationship, and it was pretty good. They weren't weird or icky. They were treated like two adults in a relationship most of the good guys respected. Sure, every so often a villain would throw around that one slur, but that was always understood to be wrong. Midnighter and Apollo are a shockingly decent example of gay representation in an era where comics like The Boys would play that kind of relationship for laughs. I mean, I think Midnighter and Apollo were the first gay wedding in comics history, which is pretty wild considering you rarely hear about it. But it does just sort of show up at the end of Volume 1 as opposed to being its own event issue, which is how comics tend to handle weddings these days. But I do think that relationship is important, and why I believe doing these two justice on screen is crucial. Essential characteristics. Our Apollo needs to be strong. Like believably, impossibly strong. I think it helps if we have a Superman type in this role. Is he white? Almost always. In a reboot, I guess called Wildstorm, he and Midnighter were both not white, although I can't find exact details on their backgrounds. I'm going to say in this case that is not a concern for casting for two reasons. Number one, I think both actors in the movie will be white, since I do not see a world where the first DCEU movie, White Superman, is going to tell non-white Superman and Batman to stop killing because it's wrong. Number two, that comic Wildstorm is not really in continuity. It functions like an Elseworld story. Wildstorm was released in 2017 and is recently recently as 2020, we have seen Midnighter and Apollo in Superman and the Authority, and they're both white. As far as the look, I want tall, broad shoulders, a Superman type. Doesn't need to be super edgy or sarcastic or anything like that. Apollo is not too much one way or the other, although he does need to be angry sometimes. The runners up. So there are a couple of actors that work for Apollo, and I am really torn between two. But before them, Murray Bartlett could probably do it. You may remember him from White Lotus Season 1, or that one episode of Last of Us that was good. He's nice, handsome, an all-around Superman-ish type, and in the same age range as my Midnighter. Then there's Coleman Domingo. Now again, I don't think the Superman who kills will be anything but white, but if they wanted to cast someone else, Fear the Walking Dead's Coleman Domingo is a good candidate. He's got a ton of experience and stands a solid 6'2". That is Superman material. But then you've got my two winners. Originally, I was all about Matt Bomer for this one. Why? Easy. Bomer was on my Superman shortlist. I thought he was a great fit, but he was ultimately rejected for being too old based on what it seems like James Gunn is going for in Superman Legacy. So now we have an opportunity for an older Superman, and oh look, Bomer also happens to be gay. Perfect. You guys probably recognize Matt Bomer from Doom Patrol, where he plays Larry Trainor, aka the Negative Man, and the vibe of Larry is very different from Superman and Apollo, but I still think Bomer could easily swing Apollo, since Larry is more emotionally complex and Bomer handles it really well. But then I came upon another actor who I kind of love for this role. Guardians of the Galaxy and Pushing Daisy's Lee Pace. Ronan the Accuser is actually a fantastic Apollo audition. He's serious, mean, and ultimately believes he's doing what is necessary for the survival of his species. Also, Pace is quite tall, which means he's got the Apollo profile down. While Bomer is known for a more likable persona, Pace, especially recently, has played more villains, or at least jerks. Think Hobbit, Guardians, Lincoln, Foundation, probably, I haven't seen it. And he's just a very solid actor. Really funny. You know if you've seen one of his recent movies, which I won't spoil. And he's worked with Gunn on Guardians, which is the best way you can get cast in one of these apparently. So listen, Matt Bomer, I love you, you deserve a role like this. However, I think Lee Pace might be a slightly better pick for Apollo, and no one is more surprised by that than me. So my Apollo is Lee Pace. The last Authority member I want to cover in this video is Jack Hawksmoor, the God of Cities. Don't worry, the others will come later. In fact, that video is currently live on Nebula. But anyway, Jack Hawksmoor is the second leader of the Authority. Jack takes over after Jenny's death, and Jack's reign marks a stark change in the team's ethos that would go on to define the Authority among comic audiences. So, you know how when Jenny Sparks was leader of the Authority, they spent most of their time fighting gods and aliens and super terrorists? Well, Jack comes in and they immediately start toppling governments. As Jack explains, if aliens showed up on Earth and started doing genocides, the Authority would step in and everyone would cheer. But a warlord from Earth takes power in their own country and starts doing those same things, and for some reason, everyone's cool with it. Jack thinks that's not right. And listen, I get the argument. And I think the circumstances of the comic tend to prove Jack right. The governments of the world that wag their finger at the Authority are frequently scheming to do something evil or just stupid that might get everyone killed. And the mantra of the Authority has always been, someone has to do it, so we will. With great power comes a great responsibility that trumps international laws. So this is a logical next step for the team, to fight injustice. The big problem with Jack's Authority that the book never really gets into is accountability. Hypothetically, the US government could do a war that breaks international laws, but there would be consequences. From within, the voters that elected that government could vote them out of power, and from without, other nations could retaliate. The Authority is not accountable to anyone. They're so powerful individually and as a team that if they go bad, there's nothing anyone could really do to stop them. But since in this book they're always right, that never comes up. And it is a disservice done to a genuinely interesting idea. If you're wondering why the change, well, it all comes down to writers. Jenny Sparks dies in the last issue written by Warren Ellis, and that marks the end of what let's call Chapter 1, the Sparks years. Chapter 2, the one where Jack is in charge and the Authority goes after dictators, was written by Mark Millar. Now listen, I like a lot of Millar's stories, but they do tend to follow a similar path, whether it's Civil War, or Superman Red Sun, or Jupiter's Legacy, or Nemesis. A lot of Millar protagonists are heroes or anti-heroes who are unsatisfied with the actions of an unjust government and do their own thing. And it is frequently framed as a complex moral argument, but in my opinion, the books rarely get there. I do think Millar has gotten better at this over time, but his early work, like Authority, seems much deeper than it actually is and comes off mostly as authoritarian wish fulfillment. And Jack Hawksmoor, remember remember him, becomes the mouthpiece for these ideas. Jack is the one who goes on TV and says, the government is bad and we're cool, we're gonna do what we want, you're welcome. He even does interviews on behalf of the team. But who is Jack Hawksmoor? Well, Jack was just your normal American kid. He loved hanging out with friends, watching TV and ice cream, and he hated doing chores, homework, and being randomly abducted by aliens who would turn out to be people from the far future and having his organs surgically replaced with machines to the point where every bit of original Jack had been replaced, and then was he even human anymore? This all happened instantaneously, and no one around Jack understood what was going on. He looks like your average man. In fact, the only giveaway that Jack is some sort of post-human are the treads on his feet. But besides that, he's a regular guy. He wears a suit or a t-shirt to fight a big troll or whatever. And he also smokes. But as a result of all of that experimentation and surgery, Jack has one of the weirder superpowers in the Authority. He's the god of cities. Sort of like how Aquaman is the god of the sea. When Jack is near a city, he gets stronger. The bigger the city, the stronger Jack becomes. He can also control parts of the city, turn a brick wall into a big fist or melt the streets. He can command part of the city like Aquaman commands the fish, make a fire escape, catch a criminal, and he can commune with the city. Jack can sense it, how it's feeling, if it's in pain, if it's in danger. Jack Hawksmoor breathes pollution, he can see the memories in windows, and under certain circumstances he's even turned entire cities into kaijus. The thought process with Jack is that since superheroes always fight in cities, if one was powered by the city, that'd be pretty good. And the Authority spends their time running from city to city, so Jack is an invaluable resource for figuring out what's going on immediately. Jack fits comfortably into the Authority leadership position. Although he's not the best manager, Jack has trouble keeping track of some of the more difficult members of the team and doesn't quite have the same charisma as Jenny Sparks. He is in an on-again, off-again relationship with the engineer, who we will get to in the next video, and has a couple of other formative relationships that get covered in his solo comics. In fact, Jack used to be very noir. He talked about the city and loneliness while perched on a rainy rooftop, but that seems to be more of a phase that Jack has since gotten over. Jack's most memorable moment as leader of the Authority came during the coup d'etat event, after the government accidentally caused an explosion in the Bleed, the in-between dimension where the Authority parks their spaceship. The Authority, led by Jack, overthrows the government and installs themselves as the planet's leaders. They barely meet any resistance since nothing can stop them, and the governments all kind of do agree that they stink and deserve to be couped. And even though the decision is supported by every member of the team, Jack is the face of the coup. He leads the charge, and it has become the event that defined the Authority. They took power like so many other heroes have since, but did it for the right reasons and solved all of Earth's problems. See what I mean when I say authoritarian wish fulfillment? Future versions. Oh yeah, it is rumored that 3 members of the Authority will be the villains in Superman Legacy. Keep in mind this is super early days, but the rumor makes sense. These guys can show up, cause trouble, get beaten, and then the other Authority members will form the proper team. And as of now, Jack is one of the characters rumored to appear in Legacy. We'll get to the other 2 in the next video. But I'll bet anything that Jack is the leader. He functions as a very effective villain, especially when to fight Superman, since Superman is so defined by his connection to Metropolis and Smallville. Jack can do a version of what Manchester Black does and What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, call out a bumbling and corrupt government, highlight some larger existential threat, and then take power since only he can stop it. The other 2 members will probably follow Jack's lead, although maybe one will eventually defect. So we are casting the main antagonist for this movie. This guy needs to have presence. Essential characteristics. Jack Hawksmoor needs to feel like he's the product of the city. What does that mean? He needs to be able to seem dirty, grimy, angry. Jack needs to have an attitude. He's also a brawler. He gets right in the middle of it, punching or kicking, bolstered by the power of the city, and he's drawn like a guy who can scrap, so he needs to look tough. And Jack doesn't get angry as much as he gets disappointed. Governments and people in power fail him. It wouldn't hurt if our Jack brought a little dad energy to this movie. But most of all, this actor needs to share the stage with Superman and Lex Luthor, 2 of the biggest characters in all of comics. And Jack cannot get overshadowed. So we need an actor with some gravitas. As far as age is concerned, Superman's age or older. So 30 plus. I like one in his 40s, but I'll settle for mid to late 30s if they can seem older. Racially, we'll get to it. The runners up. Listen, was Karl Urban built for this role? Yes, but it's too on the nose. We cannot just do Billy Butcher again, even if the actor's name is the word for cities. It's just too obvious. Let's look at some other actors with similar vibes, like Justin Theroux, a king among men. And not just because he wrote all of Justin Hammer's ex-wife dialogue from Iron Man 2. No, Theroux is great at playing a tough, down-to-earth guy. Exhibit A, Leftovers. Exhibit B, Zoolander breakdance fight. Either way, he'd be a solid Jack. We all know Anson Mount deserved better than ABC's, IMAX's, Hawaii's, and Humans. Well, maybe it's here. He's had a good run recently with the new Star Trek shows. On Trek and in Humans, Mount plays a leader. Maybe he's the right guy to lead the Authority. I could also see Michael Shannon shining here, except he's already done Guy Who Beat Up Superman, so it's probably not worth it again. Someone on Twitter suggested Arrow's Stephen Amell, and I don't hate it. Amell's pretty tough. He led a big network series for nearly a decade, so he can command some attention. He's also older, but not old, 42, and a very physical performer. I can see Amell throwing down with Superman. I can also see Aaron Paul nailing this role. He's got a very salt-of-the-earth, everyman charm that makes Jack work. Paul's an option. But I absolutely love Joel Edgerton for this role. He's got everything I want in a Jack Hawksmoor. He's gritty, tough, like in Warrior. He can do angry, and it's not like he's above this stuff. Just last year he came back for Obi-Wan, and he was even in what one person has called our generation's Star Wars, Bright. And apparently he and Josh Hartnett are up for Harvey Dent in The Batman 2, so I say, if he doesn't get that, Joel Edgerton would be an excellent Jack Hawksmoor, and he is my dream pick here. However, the same rumors that say Jack is going to be the villain in this movie also point to Jack being played by a black man. So that changes things. Also does not bode well for my Luthor, since I doubt both of the main villains that white Superman fights will be black. But looking specifically at black actors, should this rumor be true, gives us a different group of runners-up and a new winner, but I think they're all solid. Like Winston Duke was one of my runners-up from Superman, and while I don't think that skill set transfers perfectly, I could see Duke pulling this off. As M'Baku, he is smart, confident, a warrior. However, I expect this role to go to someone with a bit more experience, and most of the best superhero movie villains are played by a relative veteran, or at least people with a lot of big roles under their belt. Keaton, B. Jordan, Ledger, Nicholson, Shannon, McKellen, Defoe. Sure, every so often you pull a Chukwudi Iwuji where the villain is not a megastar, but I think there are other actors that may be a better fit here than Duke. And we have options. In fact, it is unusually easy to find comprehensive lists of 30-something black actors who are capable of playing a big villain, since every subreddit and pop culture website has speculated about who could replace Jonathan Majors as Kang. Real quick, my thoughts, pretty much anyone that's a solid actor could do it. Kang can be played a million different ways. The only one I don't really like is the idea of subbing in Iwuji as a Kang variant. But like Keith Stanfield or Trevante Rhodes or Damson Idris or John David Washington all seem like plausible replacements for their own reasons. And similarly, I could see most of them as Hawksmore. For both roles, I think my favorite of the bunch is just Stanfield because he's got an unpredictable energy that can be very scary if managed well. But there is one actor that I think could work better than anyone else. I love Daniel Kaluuya in pretty much every role. I'm always trying to fit him into these, but he's a pretty specific kind of guy, so he does not always fit in. That's not to say I don't think he has range, but I don't think he'd be like the best Superman. I think the main thing that defines a Kaluuya character is a sense of rebelliousness. Slim in Queen and Slim, OJ in Nope, Chris in Get Out, Fred Hampton in Judas and the Black Messiah, W'Kabi in Black Panther, Spider-Punk in Spider-Verse. His characters are deeply skeptical of the system and frequently end up fighting against it, and that is Jack Hawksmoor. Or at least that's how Jack sees himself. So, assuming that casting rumor is accurate, and just in general, I do think he's great, Daniel Kaluuya is my Jack Hawksmoor. So those are the first four. But there are 3 other members. Where's that video? Well, it'll be on YouTube eventually, but you can watch it right now on Nebula. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back here and just talk about Nebula a little bit, because every time I do this, I start with, you already know about Nebula, but like maybe you don't. So here's the story. Nebula was founded by a bunch of creators, including myself. Some you must know, like Patrick Willems, Captain Midnight, Lindsay Ellis, etc. All my favorites. Nebula is our own streaming platform, so it gives us a space where we can post all of our videos ad-free. It's really easy to update the videos if we need to make changes, which I love because I cannot spell. And it gives us space for originals. What's an original? Well, it's whatever we want. They let Patrick Willems make a feature-length movie, Abby Thorne did a play, and when more of you guys sign up, that gives us more money to invest in these original projects. So if there's anything you want me to make, it could end up on Nebula. And I've been doing a lot of writing lately. Honestly, Nebula is the best way to do what we do. If you like my videos and the rest of the Nebula creators, you should absolutely join Nebula. And if you use my code NANDO, you get 20% off, which is great because then we know I sent you, so it also helps me out. And enjoy my early videos and exclusive videos and whatever else I come up with in the future. As always, I have to give a huge thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody who watches these videos early and ad-free on Nebula, everybody who listens to my podcast, mostly Nitpicking, and everybody who follows me on Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, Blue Sky. I'm Nando V Movies on all those platforms. That's all I got. Stay safe. I'll see you next time.